The growl started deep in Dutch's chest. It was not a bark of alarm, not the sharp sound he made when a deer strayed too close to the cabin. This was a low, guttural vibration that John Creed felt through the floorboards more than he heard it. It was a sound of wrongness, a sound that belonged to the bone-deep memory of shadow-draped compounds and the smell of ozone before the breach. Creed set his book down, his own senses instantly on high alert. He moved without a sound, his bare feet making no purchase on the worn pine. Dutch was already at the window, a black silhouette against the moon-dusted tree line, hackles raised. His massive head was cocked, ears triangulating a sound Creed's human hearing had not yet registered. Creed followed the dog's gaze. Far down the gravel track that served as his driveway, at the very edge of his property where it met the county road, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness. They were off, but they had been on just moments before. A car had pulled over, engine killed. At 2 a.m, this was his land. Miles of dense forest he had bought as a buffer against the world, against the noise, against the memories that came for him in the quiet hours. No one came out here. No one had a reason to. Dutch whined, a note of anxious fury. "Easy, boy," Creed murmured, his hand resting on the dog's powerful neck. The muscle beneath the fur was coiled steel. Dutch had served. He knew, just as Creed knew, the difference between a lost traveler and a predator. Creed moved to his footlocker, the same one that had followed him across 3 continents. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in foam, was his Sig Sauer P226. He checked the magazine, chambered around with a practiced metallic whisper, and slid it into the holster on his belt. He did not need a light. The moon was nearly full, and his eyes had long ago adapted to the language of shadows. He and Dutch moved as one unit, slipping out the back door and into the cool night air. They used the trees for cover, moving along the ridge that overlooked the drive. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Creed focused on his breathing, slowing his heart rate, becoming just another shadow in a forest of them. Below, a figure was moving. A young man, judging by his frantic, jerky movements. He had a shovel. He was digging, casting panicked glances back toward the silent road. The beam of a small flashlight danced erratically, illuminating a patch of disturbed soil and roots. Creed watched. He observed. This was not a man burying treasure. This was a man trying to make something disappear. Dutch stayed perfectly still at his side, a silent statue of lethal patience. He was waiting for the word Creed would not give unless necessary. Control was everything. The man grunted with effort, sweat shining on his forehead even in the pale light. He tossed the shovel aside and ran back to his car, a sleek, expensive sports car that was utterly out of place on this rugged path. He returned with a duffel bag. It looked heavy. He threw it into the shallow hole, his movements hurried and clumsy. That was enough. Creed did not shout. He did not need to. He simply stepped out from behind a massive oak, Dutch a menacing shadow at his heel. "That's far enough." Creed's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. It was the voice of a man who had given commands that decided life and death. The young man froze. He spun around, his eyes wide with terror. He looked like a cornered animal. He was maybe 20, dressed in clothes that cost more than Creed's monthly mortgage. He saw Creed, then he saw the dog, and his face went pale. I'm lost," the kid stammered. "My car broke down." Creed's eyes flicked to the sports car. It was brand new. It had not broken down. You're on private property, Creed stated, taking a slow step forward. Dutch mirrored him, the low growl returning. And you're digging a hole. The kid's eyes darted from the hole to Creed. Panic took over. He made a desperate choice. He abandoned the shovel, abandoned the half-filled hole, and sprinted for his car. He fumbled with the keys, the engine roaring to life with an obscene shriek that shattered the forest's peace. Tires screamed on gravel as he tore away, fishtailing wildly before finding purchase and disappearing down the road. Creed did not pursue. He had the man's face. He had the car. More importantly, he had the hole. He walked over to the disturbed earth, Dutch sniffing cautiously at the edge. The duffel bag was partially covered with loose dirt. Creed knelt, using his hands to pull it free. It was a simple canvas gym bag, a local high school logo stitched on the side. He unzipped it. His blood went cold. Inside was a girl's worn leather jacket, a single pink sneaker, and a textbook. Sprawled across the cover of the textbook, in bubbly teenage handwriting, was a name: Sarah Jenkins. Underneath the book was a cell phone, its screen shattered. And beneath that, wrapped in a blood-soaked towel, was a heavy, ornate trophy. A debate club award. The inscription was for Kyle Thorne. Creed knew that name. Everyone in the county knew that name. Kyle was the son of Marcus Thorne, the man who owned half the valley, including the bank, the lumber mill, and the loyalty of the county sheriff. He looked at Dutch. The dog looked back, his intelligent eyes filled with a certainty that confirmed Creed's own. This was not just a crime. This was an execution. And they were standing at the grave. But there was no body. Creed zipped the bag closed. He scanned the woods, his tactical mind assessing, analyzing. Why bury her things but not her? Was she still alive? Was this just the beginning? He knew one thing for sure. His quiet life was over. The war he thought he had left behind had just followed him home. The next morning, Creed drove into town. The duffel bag was on the passenger seat. Dutch sat in the back, his head resting between the front seats, a silent, watchful partner. The town of Havenwood was picturesque, a postcard of small-town America. But Creed had seen enough places like this to know that darkness often festered beneath the prettiest surfaces. The sheriff's department was a small brick building on the town square. Sheriff Brody was a big man with a soft belly and an easy smile that did not reach his eyes. He listened to Creed's story with a practiced air of paternal concern. He took the bag, handling it with a disinterest that set Creed's teeth on edge. "Sarah Jenkins," Brody said, turning the name over in his mouth. "Yeah, her mother called this morning. Said she didn't come home last night. Teenage girl, probably just ran off with some boy." "A boy named Kyle Thorne?" Creed asked, his voice flat. Sheriff Brody's easy smile tightened. "Now let's not go jumping to conclusions. Kyle is a good kid. His father, Marcus Thorne, is a pillar of this community. His trophy was in the bag, covered in blood, on my property in the middle of the night," Creed stated. "Could be a prank," the sheriff offered, though his gaze slid away. "Kids do stupid things. I'll look into it, Mr. Creed. You can be sure of that." Creed knew a dismissal when he heard one. He had been dismissed by colonels and politicians. The tone was always the same. He stood up. "I have your word, Sheriff?" "You have my word," Brody said, already turning his attention to a stack of paperwork. Creed walked out into the bright morning sun. He did not believe the sheriff for a second. He had seen the flicker of fear in the man's eyes when he'd said the Thorne name. This was not a system that would deliver justice. This was a system designed to protect its own. He found the Jenkins address in the phone book. It was a small, neat house on the other side of the tracks, where the mill workers lived. A tired-looking woman with worry etched deep into her face answered the door. This was Carol Jenkins. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice brittle. "Ma'am, my name is John Creed. I'm here about your daughter, Sarah." Her face crumpled. She invited him in. The house was clean but threadbare. Photos of a smiling, bright-eyed girl were everywhere. Sarah. Creed told her what he had found. He left out the blood, but he told her about the bag, the location, and the name on the trophy. Carol Jenkins sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "Kyle Thorne," she whispered. "Sarah, she had a problem with him. He wouldn't leave her alone. She told him to stop, and he got angry. She was supposed to meet me after her debate practice yesterday. She never showed up." "Did you tell this to the sheriff?" Creed asked. "I tried," she said, her voice cracking. "He said she was probably just being dramatic. He said not to make trouble for the Thorne family. I work as a cleaner at Mr. Thorne's estate. I can't lose my job." Fear. It was a currency, and Marcus Thorne owned the mint. Creed looked at the woman's terrified face and at the photos of her vibrant, missing daughter. He saw every innocent he had failed to protect, every promise broken in the dust of a foreign land. He had come here to be left alone, to let the world burn without him. But the world had a way of finding you. He made a decision, a promise. "Mr. Thorne doesn't own me," Creed said, his voice quiet but resonant. "I will find your daughter. I promise you." For the first time, a flicker of hope appeared in Carol Jenkins's eyes. It was a fragile thing, but it was there. When Creed returned to his cabin, a black luxury sedan was parked at the end of his drive, blocking the way. A man in an expensive suit leaned against the hood. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with silver hair and the predatory stillness of a hawk. Marcus Thorne. "Mr. Creed," Thorne said, his voice smooth as polished stone, "I believe you've been making some trouble for my son." Creed got out of his truck, Dutch exiting silently behind him. The dog stood at his side, not growling but radiating a palpable threat. "Your son was trespassing," Creed replied. Thorne chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "My son makes mistakes. He's young. I am here to rectify that mistake." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. "This is $10,000. For your trouble. For you to forget you saw anything last night. The sheriff has already forgotten." Creed looked at the money, then back at Thorne's arrogant face. He saw the rot behind the expensive facade, the absolute certainty that everything and everyone had a price. "I don't want your money," Creed said. Thorne's smile vanished. His eyes turned to chips of ice. "I think you do, because the alternative is unpleasant. You're new here. You don't understand how things work. I own this valley. The law, the jobs, the very ground you're standing on. You are a ghost. I can make you disappear, and no one will even notice you're gone." Creed took a step forward. He was shorter than Thorne, but he moved with a density, a coiled power that made the larger man instinctively take a step back. "You're wrong," Creed said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You don't own the ground I stand on, and you don't own me. I'm not a ghost. I'm the man who is going to burn your little kingdom to the ground." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Stay off my property, and tell your son that if I find him anywhere near that girl, I will break him." Marcus Thorne stared, momentarily speechless. No one spoke to him like that. He was used to fear and deference. What he saw in Creed's eyes was something else entirely. It was a cold, dispassionate promise of violence. Thorne got back in his car. His composure rattled. "You have no idea what you're starting," he snarled through the open window. "I know exactly how this ends," Creed said, turning his back on the man and walking toward his cabin, Dutch at his side. The war had begun. The next 48 hours proved Thorne's reach. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about a troubled runaway teen named Sarah Jenkins, hinting at a history of delinquency. Anonymous quotes from concerned teachers painted her as a liar. It was a character assassination, swift and brutal. Sheriff Brody officially closed the missing person case, citing the newspaper article as evidence of her being a runaway. The system was not just failing, it was complicit. It was an active weapon in Thorne's arsenal. Creed knew he was being watched. A nondescript sedan parked a quarter-mile down the road from his driveway. Men he did not recognize lingered too long at the hardware store when he went for supplies. They weren't professionals. They were clumsy. Thugs on a payroll. It was meant to intimidate, to make him feel isolated and vulnerable. It had the opposite effect. It made him feel focused. It made him feel at home. One evening, as he sat cleaning his rifle, a rock shattered the living room window. Tied to it was a note, written in crude block letters. "Leave it alone. Last warning." Dutch erupted in a frenzy of barking, launching himself at the broken window. Creed calmed him with a firm hand. He picked up the rock. Last warning. People like Thorne didn't give multiple warnings. This was an escalation. Creed knew he could not do this alone. Not against a man who owned the law. He needed his own network. He needed the righteous. He spent the rest of the night searching the woods around his property. Thorne's son had been panicked. He might have made other mistakes. Creed worked in expanding circles from the spot where Kyle had dug the hole, his senses on a razor's edge. Dutch worked with him, nose to the ground, a far more capable tracker than any man. It was Dutch who found her. Just before dawn, the dog let out a sharp, urgent bark from a dense thicket of undergrowth near a ravine. Creed ran, his heart pounding. There, lying at the bottom of a shallow ditch, half covered in leaves and debris, was Sarah Jenkins. She was unconscious, her face bruised and swollen. Her breathing was shallow, but she was alive. Creed gently checked for injuries. A broken arm, likely a concussion, severe dehydration. She had been left for dead. He scooped her up into his arms. She was so light. A child. His controlled rage solidified into something cold and hard as diamond. This was no longer about justice. This was about retribution. He carried her back to the cabin, Dutch leading the way. He laid her on his own bed, starting a saline IV from an old medic kit. He cleaned her wounds. He splinted her arm. He worked with the detached efficiency of a corpsman in a combat zone. He was back in that world. A world where you kept your people alive, and you eliminated the threat. Permanently. When Sarah finally woke hours later, her eyes were wide with terror. She tried to scramble away from him. "It's okay," Creed said, keeping his voice low and calm. "You're safe here. My name is John." He's going to kill me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "No, he's not," Creed said with absolute certainty. "That's over. I promise." He spent the day talking to her, slowly, patiently. He brought her water, then broth. Dutch lay at the foot of the bed, a warm, reassuring presence. The dog seemed to understand that she needed a guardian, not a weapon. He would nudge her hand with his nose, offering silent comfort. Sarah told him everything. Kyle Thorne had attacked her after she rejected him one too many times. He'd hit her with his trophy. When she fought back, he'd panicked. He thought he had killed her. He'd driven her out here to bury her, but Creed's arrival had scared him off. He'd dumped her in the ditch instead, assuming the woods would finish the job. The full depravity of it settled over Creed. The arrogance, the cruelty. He knew what he had to do. The time for working within the system was over. It was time to call in the teams. Creed made 3 phone calls that night from a secure satellite phone he kept for emergencies. The calls were short, coded, and to numbers that did not officially exist. The first was to a man known only as Reaper, a communications and surveillance ghost, a former SEAL teammate who could pull data from the air and disappear into the digital ether. "I have a situation," Creed said. "A high-value target, locally entrenched, corrupt infrastructure. Hostages." Reaper's voice was calm, clinical. "One friendly, recovered. The target thinks she's neutralized. He's getting sloppy." "On my way, 24 hours, Reaper said, and the line went dead. The second call was to Doc, their team's former 18 Delta, a medic who could perform surgery with a hunting knife and a bottle of whiskey, and who was now a practicing, if unconventional, physician in a state 300 miles away. "Doc, I have a patient. Blunt force trauma, concussion, compound fracture. Needs quiet, secure care. Bring her to me, or do you need a house call?" "House call. It's an active theater." "Understood. 12 hours," Doc replied. The third call was different. It was to a number he had not dialed in years. Ben Carter. A former Marine JAG officer who had left the service to become the kind of lawyer who chewed through corporate sharks for breakfast. A pit bull in a 3-piece suit. "Creed," Carter's voice boomed over the line. "I thought you were dead, or at least meditating on a mountain somewhere." "I need a lawyer, Ben. Pro bono. We're going up against a local kingpin. He owns the courts, the cops, everything." Carter laughed, a deep, rumbling sound. "My favorite kind of fight. Send me the file. I'll start sharpening my teeth." With the calls made, a weight lifted from Creed's shoulders. He was no longer a man alone. He was the tip of a spear. The next day, a battered pickup truck with a camper shell rolled up his driveway. Doc climbed out, a medical bag in one hand. He was a mountain of a man, with kind eyes and tattooed arms. He examined Sarah with a gentle professionalism that immediately put her at ease. "She'll be okay," Doc confirmed, after setting her arm properly and checking her pupils. "But she can't stay here. It's not secure." Creed nodded. "We move her tonight." Hours later, a nondescript panel van arrived. Reaper stepped out, thin and wiry, with eyes that seemed to see everything at once. He carried 2 heavy Pelican cases. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Give me a room," he said. Within an hour, Reaper had turned Creed's spare bedroom into a command center. Laptops, signal boosters, and encrypted hard drives covered every surface. He placed tiny, motion-activated cameras around the property's perimeter. "They've got a drone," Reaper said, pointing to a screen. "Cheap commercial model. They're watching the house. Amateurs." He typed a few commands. "Not anymore." The drone's video feed on his screen flickered and died. "I just told it to fly home to China." That night, under the cover of a moonless sky, they moved Sarah. Doc drove her in his camper, taking a winding route through back roads to a safe house he maintained 2 states away. Creed stayed behind with Reaper. Their job was to dismantle Marcus Thorne's empire. Reaper began his digital assault. He was a virtuoso. He peeled back the layers of Thorne's digital life, offshore accounts, shell corporations, encrypted emails. This guy isn't just a bully, Reaper murmured, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He's a crook. Racketeering, bribery, blackmail. He's got leverage on everyone from the mayor to the state senator. While Reaper hunted in the digital world, Creed hunted in the physical one. He needed more than just financial crimes. He needed to connect Thorne directly to the violence. He started with the town's whispers. There had to be other victims. People like Sarah. He found his lead in Amelia Vance, an investigative journalist for a small, independent online publication. She had been trying to expose Thorne for years, but her witnesses always went silent. Their stories retracted after a visit from Thorne's lawyers or a sudden, unexplained financial windfall. Creed met her in a noisy diner 20 miles out of town. He laid out the case, providing her with the details about Sarah, but keeping her location secure. Vance's eyes lit up with a righteous fire. "I knew it," she said. "I have files on 3 other women who accused Kyle of assault. They all dropped the charges. One of them left town overnight." "Get me their names," Creed said. Together, they became a formidable team. Creed's quiet, intimidating presence convinced people to talk. He would show up on their doorstep, Dutch at his side, and make the same promise he made to Carol Jenkins. "You're safe now. It's time to tell the truth." Amelia recorded their testimonies, stories of abuse, of threats, of payoffs, a pattern of predatory behavior protected by a fortress of money and power. They also had an ally on the inside. Deputy Miller, the one cop in the department who seemed to have a conscience. Creed met with him secretly. Miller was terrified, but he was more afraid of letting Thorne win. He started feeding them information, case files that had been buried, witness statements that had been altered, dispatch logs that had been deleted. The alliance was built. The warrior, the ghost, the doctor, the lawyer, the journalist, and the cop. A network of the righteous against an empire of corruption. They were gathering the evidence, building an unshakable case. But Marcus Thorne was not a man to wait patiently. He felt the net closing. His surveillance was blind. His intimidation was failing. He decided to escalate. He decided to end the problem at its source. The assault came just after midnight. Reaper saw them first. "Contact," he said calmly from the command center. 4 men, armed, moving through the west perimeter. Creed was already moving. He killed the lights in the cabin. The night outside was black. Visibility near 0. This was his element. He grabbed his rifle. "They're professionals?" Creed asked into his small headset. "Negative," Reaper's voice crackled back. "Hired muscle. No discipline. They're using flashlights." Fools. They were painting targets on themselves. Creed moved to a window, peering through a night vision scope. He saw them, 4 shadows moving clumsily through the trees, their flashlight beams cutting wildly through the darkness. They were carrying shotguns and pistols. Overkill for a warning, but not enough for a real fight. Dutch was at his side, silent and tense. He knew the scent of violence. "They're splitting up," Reaper reported. 2 moving to the back. "I see them," Creed whispered. He had a choice. He could eliminate them here, in the dark. It would be easy, but killing them would cross a line. It would turn him into the monster Thorne believed him to be. He had to neutralize them, not execute them. This was not about vengeance. This was about justice. He waited. He let them get close. Close enough to feel the false confidence of the hunter. The first 2 men reached the front porch. One of them kicked the door. a loud, splintering crash echoing through the night. "Sheriff's Department!" one of them yelled, a pathetic attempt at legitimacy. Creed was not at the door. He was already outside, having slipped out the back moments before. He came up behind the two men at the rear of the cabin. He moved like smoke. The first man turned, sensing something, and walked straight into a perfectly executed strike to the throat. He went down without a sound, gagging for air he could not find. The second man heard the muffled thump and spun around, raising his shotgun. Creed was already on him. He disarmed him with a fluid motion, twisting the weapon from his grasp. A sharp blow to the temple with the butt of his own rifle, and the second man collapsed in a heap. 2 down. Inside, the other 2 thugs were sweeping the dark rooms, their flashlights creating dancing, confusing patterns of light. "He's not here!" one shouted. Suddenly, every light in the cabin flashed on, blindingly bright. Reaper had rerouted the power. At the same moment, a high-frequency acoustic device Reaper had set up blasted a disorienting, painful sound through the house. The men cried out, dropping their weapons, clutching their ears. Creed entered through the shattered front door, a dark figure framed against the night. He moved with cold, terrifying speed. He neutralized both men with precise, non-lethal force, using zip ties to secure their hands and feet. The entire engagement had lasted less than 90 seconds. Creed stood over the 4 trussed-up men, his chest heaving slightly. He had not taken a life. He had protected his home. But seeing them here, guns in hand, sent to silence him permanently, changed something inside him. He had tried to be patient. He had tried to use the system. The system was broken. The rules of engagement had changed. He looked at Reaper, who had emerged from the back room. "They were sent to kill us," Creed said, his voice a low growl. "Thorne tried to make this a war. Now he's got one." Reaper nodded, his expression grim. "What's the play?" "The gloves are off," Creed said. "We end this. Now." The decision was made. No more defense, no more reacting. They were going on the offensive. They would tear Marcus Thorne's world down around him, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the truth. Reaper went back to his keyboard, his mission now singular and direct. He wasn't just looking for evidence of financial crimes anymore. He was looking for the kill shot. He was hunting for the one piece of undeniable proof that would connect Marcus Thorne to the attempted murder of Sarah Jenkins. "People like Thorne, they're arrogant," Reaper said, his eyes glued to a screen of scrolling code. "They believe they're untouchable. That means they get sloppy. They keep trophies." He focused his digital assault on Thorne's private estate. The property was a fortress, with a state-of-the-art security system. But every system had a back door. Every fortress had a crack. Reaper found it in the climate control system, of all places. A maintenance port left open by a lazy technician. He was in. He moved silently through the estate's digital network, a ghost in the machine. He accessed security camera logs, payroll records, private emails. He found what he was looking for in a folder buried deep on Marcus Thorne's personal server. A folder labeled Contingencies. Inside were videos, dozens of them. Deleted files from the estate's own security cameras, which Thorne had clearly kept for blackmail or leverage. Reaper's blood ran cold as he watched the footage from the night Sarah disappeared. There it was. Crystal clear video from a camera overlooking the estate's guest house. It showed Kyle Thorne dragging a struggling Sarah inside. The camera inside the guest house captured the brutal assault. It captured Kyle, panicked, standing over her still form. It captured him making a frantic phone call. Minutes later, Marcus Thorne himself entered the room. There was no panic in the older man's movements, only cold, calculating control. He checked Sarah's pulse. He spoke to his son. There was no audio, but the body language was clear. He was giving orders. He was orchestrating the cover-up. He was pointing toward the woods. "I've got it," Reaper breathed, his voice tight with triumph and disgust. "I've got it all. The assault, the cover-up, father and son. It's undeniable." He downloaded the files, routing them through a dozen encrypted servers across the globe, making them untraceable. He made copies, then copies of the copies. The evidence was secured. Now it was time to deploy it. They didn't leak it to the press. Not yet. That would give Thorne time to react, to flee, to use his immense resources to spin the story. They needed to detonate it in a way that would cause maximum, irreversible damage. They needed a public forum. Ben Carter, the lawyer, found the perfect stage. The Havenwood Town Council was holding an emergency public meeting in 2 days. The official topic was a zoning dispute over a new development project. Marcus Thorne's new development project. Thorne would be there, front and center, to accept the council's rubber-stamped approval. He would be surrounded by the very politicians he owned, in a room full of the townspeople he ruled through fear and economic pressure. It was perfect. Amelia Vance, the journalist, worked her contacts. She spread the word that a major announcement concerning the Thorne development would be made at the meeting. She hinted at a scandal, just enough to ensure the room would be packed not just with locals, but with regional media. Meanwhile, Creed made one last visit. He went to Deputy Miller. He showed him a still image from the video on his phone. Marcus Thorne standing over Sarah's body. "I have the full video," Creed told him. "We're releasing it at the town council meeting in 2 days. When it drops, all hell is going to break loose. Thorne will try to run. The sheriff will help him. I need you to be ready. I need you to make a choice." Miller stared at the image, his face pale. He was a good man trapped in a bad system. He looked up at Creed, his eyes filled with a new resolve. "What do you need me to do?" "Contact the state police," Creed said. "Tell them you have a credible threat and evidence of corruption in the county. Tell them to be ready. When that video plays, you are the only law in this town we can trust. You have to make the arrests." It was a huge risk for Miller. If it failed, his career and maybe his life would be over. The deputy nodded slowly. "I'll do it." The night of the town council meeting, the air in the room was thick with anticipation. The hall was overflowing. Marcus Thorne sat at the front, flanked by his lawyers, looking smug and confident. His son, Kyle, was not present. He had been sent away, hidden somewhere out of state. The meeting began with monotonous procedural matters. Thorne checked his watch, bored. He was waiting for his moment of triumph. Then, the council chairman announced the public comment period. The first person to walk to the microphone was Carol Jenkins. Thorne's eyes narrowed slightly. Carol's hands trembled as she held the paper she had prepared, but her voice was clear and strong. "My name is Carol Jenkins," she began. "My daughter Sarah was a student at Havenwood High. She was a member of the debate team. She was a good girl. And she is not a runaway." A murmur went through the crowd. Marcus Thorne whispered something to his lawyer, a look of annoyance on his face. "My daughter was assaulted," Carol continued, her voice rising with emotion. "She was beaten and left for dead. The man who did it is protected by the wealthiest family in this valley. The sheriff's department refused to investigate. The local paper called my daughter a liar. But we have proof. Suddenly, the large projector screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying the town seal, flickered to life. Reaper, parked in his van a block away, typed one last command. Showtime. The video began to play. Silent, grainy, and utterly damning. The room fell into a shocked silence. They saw Kyle Thorne's vicious attack. They saw him stand over Sarah's limp body. And then they saw the town's great benefactor, Marcus Thorne, enter the frame. They saw him direct the cover-up. Marcus Thorne leaped to his feet, his face a mask of purple rage. "Turn it off! Turn that off right now! This is an illegal recording!" But no one was listening. They were transfixed, watching the silent horror play out, the truth raw and undeniable. Then, a new figure walked toward the stage, a young woman with a cast on her arm and bruises still visible on her face. Her head was held high. It was Sarah Jenkins. She took the microphone from her mother. Creed and Doc, who had driven her back that afternoon, stood at the back of the room, watching. "My name is Sarah Jenkins," she said, her voice shaking but unbroken, "and I am not scared of you anymore." She looked directly at Marcus Thorne. "You took my voice. You tried to take my life. But you failed." At that moment, the doors at the back of the hall burst open. Deputy Miller stood there, flanked by 4 uniformed state troopers in full tactical gear. Sheriff Brody, who had been trying to push his way toward the projectors, froze in his tracks. "Marcus Thorne," Miller's voice boomed, filled with the authority he had been denied for so long. "You are under arrest for accessory to attempted murder, obstruction of justice, and bribery of a public official." 2 troopers moved toward Thorne, who stood, sputtering in disbelief. "Sheriff Brody," Miller continued, his voice like ice, "you are under arrest for dereliction of duty, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy." The other 2 troopers cuffed the stunned sheriff, who began to blubber about a misunderstanding. The room erupted. The media swarmed forward, cameras flashing. Marcus Thorne, the untouchable tyrant, was being led away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling around him in a blaze of public humiliation. His arrogance had finally met an immovable object. Creed watched it all unfold, a quiet observer in the storm he had created. He felt no elation, no triumph, just a quiet, profound sense of order being restored. The scales had been balanced. The aftermath was swift and total. The trial was a media sensation. The video evidence was irrefutable. The testimonies of Sarah and the other young women Thorne had silenced were powerful and heartbreaking. Ben Carter was magnificent, a legal warrior who dismantled the Thorne defense with ruthless precision. Marcus Thorne and his son Kyle were found guilty on all counts. They received the maximum sentences allowed by law. Sheriff Brody and the other corrupt officials in Thorne's pocket were also convicted, their careers ending in disgrace. The Thorne Empire, built on a foundation of lies and fear, was dismantled by bankruptcy courts and federal seizure. Justice was not just served, it was absolute. A few weeks after the verdict, Creed was on his porch, watching the sun set over the trees. Dutch was asleep at his feet. A car pulled up his driveway. It was Carol Jenkins. She walked up the steps, her face no longer etched with fear, but with a quiet gratitude. "I came to thank you," she said. "But the words, they're not enough." She looked at Creed, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I was so scared. I was ready to let him get away with it because I was afraid of losing my job. You showed me that some things are more important than a paycheck. You showed my daughter what courage looks like. Your daughter showed herself what courage looks like, Creed replied. She's the hero in this story. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Sarah is doing well, Carol added. She's enrolled in a new school, far from here. She wants to be a lawyer, like Ben Carter. She smiled. She said she wants to fight for people who don't have a voice. Creed nodded, a rare, small smile touching his own lips. The cycle was broken. The evil that had been done had inadvertently forged something good, something strong. After she left, Creed sat for a long time, stroking Dutch's head. The quiet no longer felt empty. The buffer he had built against the world had become a sanctuary. He had come to these woods to escape his ghosts, to forget the man he used to be. But the man he used to be was a protector, a guardian. He had just forgotten his mission. A month later, Creed was clearing a section of his land. A large, fenced-in area. Deputy Miller, now acting Sheriff Miller, pulled up. "Building a fortress?" Miller asked with a grin. "A school," Creed corrected him. He explained his plan. A program to train shelter dogs, especially German shepherds like Dutch, to become service animals for veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress. He would use his own money, the quiet fortune he had amassed from a life of hazardous duty pay, to fund it. Miller looked at Creed, then at Dutch, who was watching them with keen intelligence. "That's a hell of an idea, Creed. This county owes you. If you need anything at all, you call me." Creed had found a new purpose, not in fighting, but in healing, in building, not destroying. He would take the broken, the discarded, both dogs and soldiers, and give them a new mission, a new pack, a new reason to live. The final quiet moment came a year later. The training facility was built. The first class of veterans and their new canine partners had graduated. It was a warm autumn evening. Sarah Jenkins was visiting from college for the weekend. She was no longer the terrified girl he had found in the woods. She was confident, vibrant, and full of life. The three of them, Creed, Sarah, and Dutch, sat on the porch steps, watching the sky turn from orange to purple. Dutch, now old and gray around the muzzle, rested his head on Sarah's lap. She stroked his ears gently. A bond forged in trauma, now a simple, peaceful affection. They did not need to speak. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of understanding, of shared history, of a victory won not with bullets, but with courage. Creed looked out at the forest, the place he had once seen as an escape. He realized now it was not an escape, but a home. The storm had passed. The war was over, and in the quiet after, he had finally found his peace. He had not just saved a girl, he had saved himself. Justice had been done, and in its wake, something new and hopeful had been allowed to grow.